So today we're talking about things that I've learned as a new engineering manager. And while I've learned a ton of stuff since starting this role, I've narrowed it down to 5 key takeaways that I will share today. But first, let me introduce myself. So I'm Zach. I learned to code at age 9, and that fascination with computers is kind of what drove my career as a software engineer. And that's what I did for my entire professional career until about 2 years ago when I finally took the leap into people management. I was actually managing the same team I was a contributor on, which led to some very interesting challenges and opportunities for growth as well. So these days, I am an engineering manager for a high-growth healthcare startup here in the United States, and I'm working with a team of 12 entry-level engineers building growth plans and building them into the product engineers that we need to staff our product teams. So in preparation for this talk, it's very echoey in here. Okay. In preparation for this talk, I asked coworkers and friends to send me pictures and captions of how they would introduce me to a conference audience. And this is what they said. They said that I'm super hardworking and that I'm always in the office extending our products and helping our engineers grow. But I'm not always in the office, and when I'm not there, I am traveling the world building a professional image and expanding my network. Here you see me networking with a random police officer in Cluj, Romania, and on the other side, on the same night, forcing an unsuspecting construction worker into a selfie. I think they were building a crosswalk when we stumbled across them and forced them into that selfie. There were a few drinks that night, though, so. But it's not always about work. They say, I always recognize the importance of work-life balance and staying active. So when I'm not building my network, I am, their words, doing sports. And you can see me here flexing my skills or lack thereof on the basketball court. Go sports. So today we are talking about those 5 key lessons that I've learned as a new engineering manager. And we'll talk about how those lessons can be applied to any role, regardless of what level in the organization you are. So they will come from the perspective of me as an engineering manager, but you don't have to be a people manager or even a manager in engineering to get value from this, or a manager at all, I guess is my point. First things I want to cover, though, this is of course a very informal presentation, so none of the conference talks that I give are super, I started to say professional, but that's not the word I'm looking for, super strict. This is also the first time I'm delivering this talk in the United States, is here in Columbus, so that's exciting. And I wanted to point out that while a lot of what we talk about is going to intersect with leadership concepts and ideas, I did want to point out the separation between leadership and management. Leadership comes from every level of the organization. Doesn't matter what your role is, doesn't matter what your job is. And management is just a title that allows us to focus on growth. So those are 2 very different things. Lastly, this is going to be interactive, so I'm going to need your help to keep things rolling throughout the talk, and I'm going to need you to be energetic. So this usually works a lot better when there's a lot more people in the talk, but the way this will work is before we transition into each topic, you'll see a statistic like this on the screen, or a question. I'll read the question, and then I just need you to shout out what you think the answer is, whatever it is. So in this case, what percentage of employees avoid tough conversations, according to this bravely study? 7, yeah, it is very much 70, which is incredibly shocking to me, but also kind of not. And that brings us to our first topic. You cannot avoid tough conversations no matter how hard you try. And I experienced this firsthand because when I first took the role of people management and started managing my team, things that weren't necessarily my responsibility became my responsibility. For example, we had a software engineer. His name was Michael. We'll call him Michael. That wasn't his real name. But we'll call him Michael. And Michael was a brilliant software engineer. He knew the tech inside and out. He knew the products. He's the one that you would ask for questions if you need to make something more performant, or you need to deliver something a little more complex and you need help. Michael was the software engineer you would ask for help on that. The problem was, though, the way Michael communicated was not as productive or as helpful as it could be. You know, he was super brilliant on a technical level, but every interaction that he had with teammates or people out in the other parts of the organization always left some type of friction between the person that was asking for help, and the tones he used and the words he used often made people think they were dumb for asking a question, or they should have already known this. So that's problematic, and that is a tough conversation that I knew I had to have with Michael. Keep in mind, this is my second week as an engineering manager, so I did not want to have this conversation. I didn't know what the output was going to be. You know, was Michael just going to get upset and then leave the company? And then 2 weeks into my job, I've already broken into software engineer. Don't want to do that. But if I ignored it, I knew that it would cause larger problems with team cohesion and deliverables and success running forward. But also it would hinder Michael in his career even after he did leave the company, if that was eventually his goal. Because as you increase in software engineering levels, as you rise through the various different levels, soft skills become arguably more important than technical skills. You got to be able to communicate, you've got to be able to lead and mentor and coach, and things of that nature. And that was problematic if the way you came across when you communicate is not helpful. So I knew I needed to have this conversation. I knew I didn't want to, but I knew I needed to have it anyway. And so I was thinking about what the components of this would be. How do I approach this? Obviously, I should schedule a one-on-one, and we should talk in private, but how do you actually approach a conversation like this? I have some general ideas just from my career as an engineer, but not from a management perspective. But feedback, clear and constructive feedback is one of them, which brings us on to our next point. How many managers do you think are uncomfortable providing feedback to their reports, according to this Harris Poll study?
38.
So that was my original thought too, but it was 37 according to this poll. So better numbers, but if you think about globally, I say globally, but from the perspective of the people that participated in this study, if even just 37% of managers are uncomfortable providing feedback to their reports, that's still a large number. And for every one manager that's not providing that feedback, that's robbing that report of that person of their growth opportunity, there's like 10 or 12, depending on your team sizes, per year, people that are robbed of that opportunity. So providing feedback, I knew, was something that was super important and needed to be a primary component of this conversation with Michael. And that's our next lesson. It is critical that you provide constructive feedback that encourages growth. You can give feedback in a ton of different ways. Super helpful, super unhelpful. I worked at as a tech lead at a telecommunications company in Phoenix. And I worked there for roughly 1 year. We were building VoIP products and general communication software for businesses. I received feedback once the entire time I worked there. And that feedback was that I walked too fast and that I was sweaty when I came from outside. That was the feedback I received in the entire year I worked at this company. We're in Phoenix, right? It's 115 degrees outside. Probably gonna sweat. That's not helpful feedback. And I knew I couldn't approach this conversation with Michael the same way. I can't just say, Michael, your communication sucks, communicate better, because that's not actionable. That's not clear. There's no path forward. There's no growth that can come out of that type of feedback. We have to be able to provide feedback, and this goes for any level of the organization, whether you're talking to teammates or other teams or people in the company or other companies. You have to be able to provide feedback that clearly states whatever it's addressing, and it encourages success and growth out of that conversation for everyone involved. So in this case, Michael would grow because we would come up with a plan to improve his communication skills and work on his soft skills to better set him up for success in future engineering roles and for promotions in our company. And it also is a growth opportunity for me as a new manager because I don't know what the hell I'm doing at this point 2 weeks in. So if we provide the feedback in a constructive way that encourages growth, we not only leave that conversation with a plan and a way forward, but we leave that with a little bit more trust for each other as well. So I knew that's what I needed to do. I needed to talk to Michael, I needed to have this conversation, and I knew it needed to be constructive and useful. So those are all very high-level things, but how do you actually apply that into a conversation? What does that actually look like? What percentage of professionals say they would be uncomfortable or completely refuse to ask for help, according to this one poll study? 5, 22, or 73%?
2020.
73% of people said they would be uncomfortable asking for help. That's crazy, but I kind of was one of them. And it's interesting because, through my entire career as an engineer, I knew that nobody knows everything. You don't have to know everything. It's better to get help early and move fast. Like, I knew that as a career, but for whatever reason, as a contributor, but for whatever reason, when I transitioned over to management, that didn't follow me. The way I looked at this was, at the time, erroneously of course, the way I looked at this was if I didn't know how to approach such a simple thing, a seemingly simple component of people management, maybe I'm not actually fit for this role. Maybe I'm not ready to actually be a people manager. Maybe I'm not ready to help people grow. Which is our next lesson. You will always need help, and you have to let the people around you help you. So it wasn't until I was in a one-on-one conversation with another manager at the company. She wanted to check in, see how things were going, what type of support I needed in my new role, and we were talking about various different things, what the transition was like. It was very much a, you're a manager now, go manage type situation. So we were talking about the types of things that I actually need to be successful in that and to not harm anybody. So the 3 things that I was most afraid of when I took this role was breaking people, breaking teams, and breaking products. As an engineering manager, if you're sitting in the wrong spot and you're not quite sure what you're doing or you're not open to providing or getting help from the people around you, those are the 3 things that you can do major, major damage, breaking people, products, and teams. And I didn't want to do that. So we were talking about that and how I was afraid that if I didn't know how to approach a general people situation, if I didn't know how to have this type of conversation, that I might not be viewed favorably at the company and maybe I would not have a job too much longer. And so as I was talking, Grace was the other manager, she just looks at me and she says, "Zach, that's dumb." She said, "That's completely unrealistic. No single person knows everything there is to know about anything. That's why we work in teams, because everybody has different perspectives, different experience, different ideas. And we combine those together to make the most ideal path forward. And that's ultimately what we're looking for." So after she said this, I was thinking, well, actually, yeah, that makes sense. That's how we approach engineering. That should also be how we approach topics about people. So we started talking about this specific situation with Michael and what I can do to approach that and make that a constructive conversation with a positive outcome. So we started talking about an experience that she had with one of her reports not too long ago and one of her people that had a similar problem. It wasn't the same issue, but it was a similar problem. And she talked about providing a clear path, a clear description of what the problem is, but it being more of a collaborative conversation. Not me coming to Michael and saying, "Michael, your communication's not working. This is what we need to do to fix it. This is what we should do now, moving forward." So while I do have to set that tone that, yes, the communication based on things I've observed and feedback from others is not working as productively as it could be, it was more of a collaborative conversation. So how do we fix this? What areas are you struggling with in terms of communication or soft skills? It turns out Michael wasn't even aware, like there was no malicious intent. He wasn't trying to be a jerk. He just came across as a jerk. And he was not even aware so much that he was, or aware enough to pay attention to the fact that he was. And so that was the conversation that we had and how we started building that path forward. Because we now were having this conversation. I had know that the feedback, clear, constructive feedback needs to be the source or the base of this conversation. And I've reached out to my coworkers, other managers that have a lot more experience than I do at this time, and they still do, and felt more equipped to approach this conversation. All of those components are great, but there's still one thing that's super important that we're kind of missing, and that's trust. You can't have these candid conversations with great outcomes without some level of trust. What percentage of employees say they would trust strangers more than their direct manager or supervisor? 58. Over half of employees say that they would be more comfortable being vulnerable with a complete stranger than their manager, who is supposed to be there to help them grow and help them succeed. That's insane, because none of these other lessons work without trust, right? You have to be able to trust. It's imperative that you spend time building trust with people. That is our next point. But you have to have some level of trust that the information that is being provided to you by a manager or by a coworker is not malicious, that it's meant for improvement. It's meant to help the team grow, to help you grow. But you also, as the provider of that feedback, you have to also trust that it will be received in a positive way and that you'll be able to move forward in a collaborative way. So there were kind of two components of this that played into this conversation with Michael. I had worked with Michael as a contributor for a while, and while it is a different type of trust that you have with a coworker versus a manager, and you do have to spend additional time to reshape what that trust and what that relationship means when that dynamic changes, we knew each other well enough to realize that our intents were good. And that when I was talking with Michael and telling him about his communication challenges and asking how we should improve that, he knew that it was coming from a good place. He didn't necessarily like everything that I had to say. He didn't necessarily like everything that went into that conversation, but he knew that moving forward, that was a good path to move forward, to understand how to help improve that problem, and that I was coming from a perspective of growth, which is incredibly important, right? You can tell somebody that they're doing something bad, and you can have a very negative perspective on that and a very negative approach, but that doesn't help any humans anywhere. And there was enough trust there that Michael and I were able to have this conversation. But then there was also this other element of trust, where I finally asked in that one-on-one with Grace, I was able to be vulnerable with her and talk about my fears of not knowing stuff in this role. And from that, we had enough trust with each other, because we'd worked with each other for a while now, and we had enough trust with each other that I was willing to share that, or able to share that, and she was able to provide very direct, very candid responses to that fear, which ended up improving my mental thoughts around this role and how to approach people issues, and set me up for the conversation with Michael. So you have to spend time building trust with your people. If you work with people, you have to be able to trust them. They have to be able to trust you. And it's imperative that you spend time building that trust. Trust also reduces things like stress or anxiety or things of that nature. So globally, what percentage of employees say they have an increased level of anxiety when thinking about work or at work, according to this Gallup study? 43%. So 43% of employees worldwide say that when they think about work, they have an increased level of stress. Now, that's a lot of people, but honestly, that wasn't nearly as many people as I thought it would be. I thought it would be like 150%, like a lot. But when you dig into this study, the source, or the most common source of this stress, is not really understanding what expectations are of you as an employee or your employers as your bosses. Which brings us to our final lesson, to be extremely clear about expectations. It's vital. It's vital because if you don't know what's expected of you and your people don't know what's expected of them, you can't align and focus on working toward whatever your common goal is that you're trying to reach. The first thing I did when I took over my team as their manager was set one-on-ones with them to talk about what those expectations were. So as their manager, I had expectations of them, and we're not talking about granular things like this is what time you clock in, this is what time you open your code editor. We're not talking about those trivial, more granular things. We're talking about high-level things. So we talked about things like their involvement in various committees throughout the organization, mentoring and coaching junior engineers or other engineers in the company, being available to help outside the team directly. So we talked about those high-level things. But one of the important parts of this conversation was there was also space for them to tell me what they expected of me. So just because in this case I was their manager doesn't mean that expectations are a prescription or a direction that is not open to conversation or collaboration. I have things that I expect from them to be successful in their careers on this team, but they also have things that they expect from me and how I can support them, what they need from me in order to be successful and do their jobs. So it was incredibly important that we had both of those conversations in a very candid way, because we have to understand what we need or what we want from each other in order to be successful in that. Now, one thing that's incredibly important to point out here too is this is not a recipe for micromanagement at all. Nobody likes to be micromanaged. I don't like to micromanage, and all that does is create a toxic environment when you try to manage people. We hire people because they're good at what they do, and we need to make sure we give them the space to do that. So while your expectations should be extremely clear, they should provide the space for them to do their job in the way that they need to. And that's the same with coworkers, right? Everybody has expectations of people, and we just need to communicate those expectations in a clear way that also provides space for everybody to do their job in their own way. Like I said, we're not creating a granular list of trivial tasks that have to be done during the day. We're just setting these high-level expectations. So if we combine all of the things that we spoke about today, you can't avoid tough conversations. Constructive feedback is critical, and it has to encourage growth. You're always going to need help. You need to recognize that, and you need to be able to accept help from other people. You have to spend time building trust, and you have to be clear about your expectations. If we combine all of these, it's not going to make a perfect manager. It's not going to make a perfect contributor. But what it will do is set the tone of success and progress and foster a culture of collaboration and growth, which is ultimately what we need for our engineering teams and for any team, whether you're in engineering or not. Yeah. So thanks for listening. This is... I'm stammering a lot here. My flight back into the States was delayed, and I got to the hotel at like 3 o'clock this morning, so I apologize for that. But yeah, feedback is incredibly important to me as well. Every conference talk I give is an opportunity for growth. So any thoughts you have on the presentation, the content at all, please send that over to me, and I encourage you to connect with me. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you.